Hi pals, and welcome to a new video. I'm Kate, and today I'm talking about 3 classic novels that make the perfect comfort reads in winter. These are hot water bottle novels. They're really books that are made to kind of lift the spirits and get you through the colder months in December, January, February. Let's go ahead and get started. First up is a new to me novel, and it is Operation Heartbreak by Duff Cooper. I have it in this Persephone Books edition. In its essentials, Operation Heartbreak is a character study of a man, an army cavalry officer, who achieves more in death than he ever did in life. This one I think is absolutely brilliant. This is also due to be published next year, I've realised this week, in a Penguin Classics edition, and the cover is absolutely stunning. I don't want to give too much away with this, however, it is impossible to avoid if you look into this book at all. It's impossible to avoid discovering that this is a fictionalized account of Operation Mincemeat. Operation Mincemeat was an espionage scheme created by the British Intelligence Service during the Second World War in 1943, designed to convince Nazi Germany that they intended to invade Greece rather than the presumed and correct target of Sicily. It was a roaring success and changed the course of the Second World War. It was essentially the perfect spy double bluff, and they achieved it by floating a corpse which was carrying invasion plans for Greece onto the Spanish shore. I think it might have been Cadiz, but I might be wrong in that. And this Operation Heartbreak is a study into what type of man should have been or could have been that corpse. It's a fascinating premise, and like I said, I've had this on my TBR for quite a while. That's because I love Operation Mincemeat, the film. It's like a comfort watch for me. This follows a cavalry officer in the British Army, and the army is his life. He valorizes war. He is borderline obsessed with his regiment, with the culture of the army, with horses. Because of a mixture of bad luck, he is a tad too young to have been deployed during the First World War, and a tad too old for the Second World War. Because of a mixture of bad luck and some personal failings, he fights in neither the First World War or the Second World War, and so he never fulfills this ambition that he has, and his life in the army doesn't quite go to plan. This book is something of a love letter to the army. The character types that the army is filled with, the discipline, the morals, the structure. There is also some failed romances in this as well. We follow this cavalry officer when he is a teenager. He is very idealistic, very naive, but really motivated by a sense of service and duty to his eventual endpoint, where he is incredibly resentful, really quite jaded and quite angry at kind of not ever reaching or fulfilling his dreams and his ambitions. In this, his beloved cavalry regiment are mechanized from horses to tanks, and horses, his love of horses and riding, are such a huge part of his life. He has romances, one in British India and one in London, that never quite work out. This is a fascinating study into what almost achieving your ambitions and your desires does to you over a kind of prolonged period of time, and how failures can really compound onto a character. And in this, he does achieve, I guess, every soldier's ambition, which is to help change the course of a kind of generational defining war. But he does it in such a kind of macabre and morbid way. It's a really unique little book, this one. I had such a lovely day reading this, and although it's very simply written, it is very heartfelt, and the characters in this, although they are true to their time, do feel very honest and very real. After I finished this, I had a look at the Goodreads reviews, and a reviewer called this Barbara Pym for men, which not only made me laugh, but I do think is probably quite an apt description. This is very observant of a particular type of army officer's life. It's also very quiet, very sincere, and very English. Duff Cooper, the author of this, is a man, and this makes this one of the rare Persephone books written by a man, which I also love. The Clement Attlee government in 1950 tried to dissuade him from publishing this, I think because they were worried it would have implications for the relationship with the Spanish government and for kind of exposing kind of espionage secrets of the Second World War. He was told this story at a dinner party with Winston Churchill, which I just think is the most wonderful way to get a plot for a novel. This is just the perfect little novella to read on an afternoon or over a couple of evenings in winter. Quite sad at the end. I also really recommend watching Operation Mincemeat, the film. Like I said, that's such a comfort watch for me now. It's quite like the Guernsey Literary Potato Peel Pie Society, in that I watch it and just feel like warm and comforted. So yeah, that is my first recommendation, Operation Heartbreak by Duff Cooper. Next up on my list of perfect classic comfort reads for winter is Cranford by Elizabeth Gaskell. I read this during Victober. Elizabeth Gaskell is a favourite author of mine. The only edition of Cranford that I have is this 1901 Macmillan and Co edition from America that my dad got me for Christmas a good few years ago now. So what I'll do is I'll put a more recent edition up here. Cranford is a Victorian novel. I think it was published mid 1850s, and like the next novel that we're going to be talking about, it's very episodic. Think more a series of interconnected short stories than a novel. Those stories are focused on the inhabitants of a small northern town in England called Cranford. And we mainly follow the women of Cranford. They are older spinsters, widowed women, all living in kind of reduced circumstances, but trying very, very hard to keep up appearances. We do also meet servants and kind of doctors and family friends. The stories in Cranford are told through the eyes of a visiting friend, and she paints the most wonderful picture of these women. They're very old-fashioned. They can be a little bit silly and a little bit snobbish perhaps, but more than anything, Cranford is such an uplifting novel. It really does kind of like warm the spirits. If you want to read a novel where people are genuinely kind, compassionate, and generous to each other, this one is really it. It does have its sad moments, but all in all, this, without being a Christmas novel, really for me has that spirit of kind of kindness and generosity to it. I will say that Cranford is probably a little bit more earnest than I would usually like in my portrayals of like provincial English life. I like generally, if the scale is like sardonic to earnest, to be somewhere more over here. Think like E.F. Benson, Barbara Pym. So I do have to be in the right mood for this one, and I always find that the beginning of autumn or December is the perfect time to read this, because it captures me at the right time and I'm in the right kind of mood for something that is very, very sincere. There are also some wonderful audiobook versions of Cranford. I listened to one on BorrowBox. I think it's by Naxos Audiobooks, narrated by Claire Wiley. I thought that she did a fantastic job, and there is some wonderful piano music between each of the chapters, so I thoroughly recommend that. As a side note, Cranford is based on the Cheshire town of Knutsford, where Elizabeth Gaskell grew up. That's a town in northwest England, and it is every bit as quaint and cosy and English as you think it will be if you've ever read Cranford. If ever you're around the kind of Cheshire area, I definitely recommend going because it is an absolute treat. All in all, if you want a novel to kind of book you up, to remind you how kind and generous and compassionate people can be, Cranford is definitely the novel for you. Right, onto the third novel, which coincidentally is mentioned in the opening chapters of Cranford. Two of the characters get into a disagreement on its literary merits, and it is The Pickwick Papers by Charles Dickens. I read this in October for one of my Victorian reads. And this, I think, might be the funniest Charles Dickens novel that I've read. This was a reread for me, and I couldn't really remember too much about it. I knew a lot like Cranford, it is very episodic. There's not really a through line in the Pickwick Papers, but I'd completely underestimated just how much of a good time I was going to have with this one. From the very beginning, it just made me laugh and smile, and really was such an enjoyable reading experience. In the Pickwick Papers, you are following the adventures of the Pickwickians, and even just talking about them makes me smile because you really do come to love this group of men. They're travelling throughout England, kind of chronicling their adventures, and the people they meet, the stories that they're told. They're travelling via coach, and this is just the funniest, the most warm-hearted, curious novel. And this novel isn't perfect, but it really does have a kind of spirit of joy and curiosity. Now, if you've never read this and you're more familiar with Charles Dickens' later work, say like Bleak House as an example, you will find that this is a little bit different. It doesn't have the same level of kind of depth or complexity, but it's meant to entertain you, and it does that so perfectly. And one of the things that I kept coming back to when I was reading this is that a good sense of humour is able to like transcend 200 years and still make you laugh even now. If you want to have a thoroughly good time, this is the novel for you, which is why I think it's perfect to read during winter. At the heart of the Pickwick Papers, you have the most wonderfully warm, eccentric characters. Mr. Pickwick, his loyal servant kind of Sam Weller, the Pickwickians, Mr. Winkle, Mr. Snodgrass. They're just a joy to read, and it's so heartwarming to kind of see their loyalty to each other, their friendship, and how adventurous in their own way, how curious about human nature, and how they have a real passion for life. Like Cranford, this is really one to just kind of book your spirits up. One thing I found fascinating about the Pickwick Papers this time is that you can rarely see Charles Dickens honing his craft throughout the novel. This was serialised, I think, from 1936 to 1937, and you can almost see how it gets kind of more clearly defined and kind of tighter in like characters and plot towards the end of the novel. It's just an absolutely fascinating thing to read. If you're reading this in December, there are also a couple of chapters set during Christmas. There is the story of the goblin who stole a sexton, and the following chapter, which are set in December. I've recently finished reading Dickens' The Enchanter by Peter Conrad, which I'll put here, and he had a lovely anecdote whereby an acquaintance's father, when he was deployed during the Second World War, took an anthology of sayings by Sam Weller from the Pickwick Papers with him to keep a little bit of England with him, which I just think is so lovely and so moving. And if you've read the Pickwick Papers, there really are some absolutely brilliant kind of like sayings that he has from him and his father. That anecdote, I think, really captures the spirit of the Pickwick Papers. It is comforting, it is warm, the perfect thing to read over a few weeks in December. It is quite long, the Pickwick Papers, but I do really think it is worth it. Before I finish, I also wanted to mention kind of what I'm planning on reading in December, because I do love to plan out my Christmas reading. The first novel that I'm hoping to get through is Dr. Zhivago by Boris Pasternak. This will be a reread for me. This is a favourite. And I'm going to start this evening, so I'm very excited for this. Whenever it gets to winter, I do always like to start on the Russian classics. And then in December, I'm also planning on reading Little Women by Louisa May Alcott. This is the folio edition, which is such a beautiful edition. I think I will track down a copy on my Kobo because this one feels almost too good to read. There is an illustration of this with all the little women as characters from the Pickwick Papers, which I absolutely love. So I'm hoping to get to Little Women and finish Little Women by the time I finish work, which is the 18th or 19th of December. That is quite a lot of reading. Audiobooks wise, I'm listening to Northanger Abbey and Mansfield Park. I'm planning to get through those in December as well. And then as I have a lot of time off from Christmas to the New Year, I'm going to tackle something longer. So they are my plans. That's it for today's video. As ever, I would love to hear from you in the comments what you're reading and what you're planning on reading in December, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!